Working as a police officer has always been challenging, but I never imagined that an ordinary night could turn into a real nightmare. My name is James Parker, and I am a veteran officer in the police department of a small town. That night, the air was particularly heavy, and a thick fog enveloped the deserted streets like a ghostly veil. The city seemed to breathe in silence, only interrupted by the occasional sound of sirens in the distance. My partner, Lisa Thompson, and I were ready for another night shift, not knowing that we were about to face something that would challenge our understanding of reality. Lisa is an excellent officer, brave and always quick to respond. But that night, there was unease in her eyes, a reflection of what I also felt but didn't want to admit. Something in the atmosphere was different, an almost palpable feeling that the night hid dark secrets we shouldn't uncover. It all started with an emergency call around 11:45 p.m. The dispatcher sounded tense, the static on the radio adding a layer of urgency to the message. All units, respond to a call on Old Mill Road. Report of disturbances and possible break-in at an abandoned property. Proceed with caution. My partner and I exchanged a glance, both feeling a wave of apprehension run down our spines. Old Mill Road was an area known for housing abandoned places, many of them with a sinister reputation. It wasn't the first time we responded to calls in that region, but something told me this time would be different. We turned on the emergency lights and sped toward Old Mill Road, the tension in the car palpable. As we approached, a sense of discomfort grew within me. The fog seemed denser, almost as if it were preventing us from seeing clearly. When we arrived at the scene, everything seemed calm on the surface. The old mill, now in ruins, stood like a dark ghost against the night sky. We called for backup and approached cautiously, our weapons drawn. We didn't know what awaited us inside. The old mill on Old Mill Road was an industrial complex that had been abandoned for decades. Its aged brick and wood structures seemed to survive only out of sheer stubbornness, defying the passage of time. The large grinding wheels, once powered by the river water that flowed beside it, lay still and moss-covered. The huge gears, which once ground tons of grain, now stood paralyzed, as if frozen in a distant past. The broken windows and rusted gates gave the mill an air of abandonment and decay. Layers of peeling paint revealed the old color of the walls, while cobwebs and wild vegetation spread throughout. As we advanced, the oppressive silence was interrupted only by our footsteps echoing through the abandoned corridors. The smell of mold and decay invaded our nostrils, and the feeling that we were not alone grew stronger. Suddenly, a muffled noise echoed through the corridors, followed by a terrifying scream. Lisa and I exchanged a quick look and rushed toward the source of the sound. When we reached the source of the noise, the scene that unfolded before our eyes chilled our blood. On the ground, writhing in agony, was a man whose face was disfigured by deep, bloody wounds. His skin seemed to have been torn off in a wild rage, exposing muscle tissue and bones. His screams echoed eerily through the mill walls, as if a creature from hell had taken over his body. Lisa quickly approached to provide first aid, but as soon as she touched the man, he let out a terrifying sound, similar to a beastly howl. His eyes, which previously reflected pure terror, now shone with a primal and inhuman fury. I took a few steps back, my hand gripping the gun in my holster tightly. Something was deeply wrong with that man, something that defied all our understanding of the natural. His transformation seemed to transcend the limits of human understanding, as if hidden and malevolent forces were possessing him. As I watched in horror, the man twisted and emitted animalistic roars. A sense of imminent danger took hold of me. I looked around, seeking any sign of threat, as I had the distinct impression that we were not alone in that abandoned mill. The shadows seemed to come alive, undulating unsettlingly, as if something was moving between them. A chill ran down my spine, and I knew at that moment that we had encountered something far more terrifying than anything our minds could conceive. My heart raced as I observed the horrifying scene before us. The man writhing on the ground no longer seemed to belong to this world, his humanity replaced by a demonic figure that made me question the very nature of reality. Instinctively, my hand gripped my gun tighter while my eyes scanned the dark corners of the mill. Something was there, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. I could feel its presence, an evil and supernatural energy that seemed to pervade every corner of that cursed place. Lisa, though visibly shaken, maintained her professional demeanor, trying to provide some aid to the man. But as she approached, he thrashed violently, his screams now turning into beastly growls. Something was taking over him, a force that seemed to be sucking his soul out. In a sudden burst, the man rose, his movements twisted and unnatural. His skin appeared to darken and stretch, as if undergoing a bizarre metamorphosis. We backed away, perplexed and terrified, unsure how to react to the creature that no longer seemed human. Then, from the dark corner of the mill, a sinister movement caught my attention. Something was moving, a shadowy, indistinct form with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce my soul. A chill ran through my body as I realized we were not alone in that place. Instinctively, I pulled the trigger, firing at the creature in the shadows. The gunshot echoed through the mill, but it seemed to have no effect. Instead, a terrifying howl responded to my attack, and I knew at that moment that our lives were in danger. The terrifying howl that echoed through the mill walls sent chills down my spine. Something supernatural was present in that scene, something that defied all my understanding of reality. I realized that my shot had no effect on the creature hiding in the shadows. It remained there, its glowing eyes staring at me with almost palpable malice. I felt cold sweat dripping down my forehead as my mind desperately tried to understand what was happening. Lisa took a few steps back, her face reflecting the same terror I felt. The disfigured man on the ground continued to thrash, his transformation becoming more pronounced. His skin seemed to tear, and sharp claws began to replace his hands. It all seemed like a nightmare, a distortion of reality that we couldn't comprehend. My training and experience as a police officer hadn't prepared me for something so surreal and terrifying. We backed away a few more steps, keeping our eyes fixed on the shadows, trying to identify whatever was threatening us. The oppressive silence of the mill was interrupted only by the agonizing sounds of the man transforming. Then a new wave of terror hit us as we realized the creature in the shadows was not alone. Other movements began to emerge, as if more of those abominations were approaching, drawn by the desperate sounds. My hand trembled as I held my gun tightly, knowing it was probably useless against those supernatural forces. Lisa and I exchanged a desperate look, aware that we were trapped in a horror trap, not knowing what awaited us. Faced with that terrifying situation, I felt a mix of panic and determination wash over me. We couldn't be paralyzed by fear. We needed to act with decisiveness and courage. I ordered Lisa to retreat and call for reinforcements immediately. She hesitated for a moment, but saw the resolve in my eyes, and reluctantly ran toward the exit. I knew I wouldn't stand a chance alone against the approaching creatures, but I needed to buy time and protect the transformed man. I positioned myself between them and the man, my gun pointed toward the unsettling shadows. My heart pounded in my chest, but I forced myself to remain calm and focused. I fired a few shots, trying to drive away the shadowy forms that were getting closer. To my astonishment, the bullets seemed to have little effect, only causing slight recoils in the creatures. They howled and contorted, but soon resumed their advance, their sharp claws and hungry eyes staring at me with supernatural malice. I backed away slowly, stumbling over debris and rubble, my eyes frantically scanning the environment for something, anything, that could help me repel those demonic beings. I felt the cold wall against my back and knew my end was near. That's when I noticed an old grinding chain, rusty but still sturdy, hanging from the ceiling. Without hesitation, I shot at the chain, causing it to fall with a crash onto the approaching creatures. The impact drove them back for a few moments, giving me a chance to take cover behind a pile of debris. As I hid, I heard the sound of sirens in the distance, signaling the arrival of reinforcements. There might be a chance, however small, for us to escape that cursed mill alive, but for now, all I could do was pray that Lisa made it in time and prepare for the worst. When the sirens finally arrived, the mill filled with the sound of police cars and officers' shouts. Armed reinforcements stormed the building, illuminating the dark corners with their flashlights. Seeing me, the officers were astonished by the scene unfolding. The transformed man, now a beastly creature, fought fiercely against the shadowy forms attacking us. Without hesitation, the officers opened fire, their bullets seeming to have more effect on those abominations. With the arrival of reinforcements, the creatures began to retreat, their howls echoing through the place. Finally, the fight seemed to turn in our favor. Exhausted but victorious, I watched as the transformed man, now lifeless, lay on the ground, his human form partially restored. We finally secured the area and began investigating what had happened there, but even with all the information collected, the true nature of those supernatural beings and the forces that led to that horrifying encounter remained a mystery. That night left an indelible mark on me and my colleagues. We had faced an evil force that defied all reason, a nightmare that would haunt our minds forever. The abandoned mill on Old Mill Road had become a forbidden place, a dark reminder that, even in our world, some horrors remain hidden, waiting to be uncovered by those bold enough to face them. My name is Mark Ramirez, and as a police officer in Los Angeles for nearly 15 years, I have faced the darkest horrors the city can offer. Nothing, however, could have prepared me for what I experienced on a sinister night patrol. It was a Tuesday, just after midnight, when I was called to investigate a possible break-in at an old house on the outskirts of Echo Park. The Victorian mansion, known for its haunted past, seemed to await me under the light of the full moon. The chill that ran down my spine as I entered that abandoned place was only the prelude to the terror that was to come. The door creaked as it was pushed open, revealing a dark hallway filled with threatening shadows. With each step, the floor seemed to whisper macabre secrets, while the dust danced in the cold air. My voice echoed through the rooms, calling for whoever might be there, but the silence that returned was even more disturbing. I climbed the stairs with my heart racing, and the faint light of candles in one of the rooms seemed to vibrate with a malignant energy. Upon entering the room, I was greeted by the presence of a female figure with a cadaverous appearance, dressed in garments from another era. Her empty eyes conveyed an indescribable malevolence, as her chilling whispers echoed sinisterly. The air became dense and cold, and the sensation of being watched by something beyond human comprehension intensified. When the candles suddenly went out, plunging the room into eerie darkness, I found myself facing the deepest horror as a man appeared. The man who emerged before me seemed to have come from a nightmare. His hair was a tangled mass of dirty and disheveled strands, falling over a pale skeletal face. The eyes, deep and bloodshot, shone with a dark madness. His clothes were in tatters, emitting a nauseating stench of alcohol and decay. He mumbled incoherently, mixing words in a disturbing murmur as if in constant dialogue with invisible entities. Every step he took seemed to echo with a supernatural weight, as if he carried a burden beyond human understanding. The aura around him was oppressive, draining the energy from the environment and creating a suffocating atmosphere. When he got closer, I could see deep marks on his arms, like scars from ancient rituals that seemed to pulse with a spectral light. The man staggered, his eyes fixed on me, and a distorted smile formed on his cracked lips. He began to chant, an unknown and frightening language that resonated on the room's walls. I felt a piercing cold, as if the very essence of the place was being drained by this accursed being's presence. Suddenly, he raised a broken bottle, wielding it as a weapon, but did not advance. Instead, he continued to mumble, his eyes gleaming with insane hatred. I tried to talk to him, to calm him down, but my words seemed to vanish into the void, swallowed by the oppressive darkness that surrounded us. He then began to tell a story, his voice a rough whisper echoing with pain and despair. He spoke of being cursed, condemned to wander eternally through that place, trapped between the world of the living and the dead. Every word that left his mouth was impregnated with suffering, as if he was reliving his torment at every moment. Gradually, I began to notice that the walls around us were covered with strange symbols, deeply engraved into the wood and stones. They were ancient runes, drawings that seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. The man pointed to one of them, saying they were marks left by a cult that inhabited the house many years ago, performing abominable rituals to summon dark forces. The atmosphere became even heavier, and I could feel the presence of something greater, something terribly evil that seemed to observe our every move. The man, noticing my terror, began to laugh, a hoarse and sickly laughter that reverberated through the room like a harbinger of doom. Suddenly he began to convulse, as if possessed by an invisible force. His eyes rolled back and he collapsed to the floor, writhing violently. A black smoke began to emanate from his body, filling the air with a stench of sulfur and decay. The female figure I had seen earlier reappeared, her empty eyes fixed on the scene, like a spectator of a macabre spectacle. The energy in the room reached an unbearable peak of tension. The man let out an agonizing scream, and suddenly, everything went silent. He was motionless, his body inert and cold as stone. The black smoke dissipated, but the sense of unease persisted, clinging to me like a heavy and oppressive cloak. Trying to regain control, I called for backup on the radio, but the device was dead, without any signal. The only option was to leave that hell as quickly as possible. As I turned to leave, I heard a soft whisper behind me. The female figure was now inches away, her face a mask of eternal suffering. She whispered something that sounded like a curse, and then disappeared into the darkness. I ran down the stairs, each step a desperate effort to escape the clutches of that cursed place. Upon reaching the front door, the sense of relief was brief. When I looked back, I saw the silhouette of the cursed man in the window, his eyes glowing with eternal hatred. I left the house, my heart still pounding frantically, and got into the patrol car. As I drove back to the station, the man's words echoed in my mind. His story, the curse, the dark rituals, everything seemed like a nightmare from which I could not wake up. Upon arrival, I reported the incident, but no one seemed to fully believe what I had seen. Since that night, Echo Park has never been the same for me. With every patrol, every dark alley, I feel the presence of that man as if his curse had clung to me. And on silent nights, when the wind blows cold, I can hear his macabre chant, reminding me that some horrors are eternal. I am Officer Anthony, and I have been working in Los Angeles for almost 9 years. However, what my partner Carol and I experienced during an operation in an abandoned school continues to haunt us to this day. It all began on a Friday night when we were called to investigate suspicious activity at the old Rosewood school, a building that had been closed for more than a decade. Nearby residents reported hearing screams and seeing flickering lights coming from inside the school. We knew the night would be long and unsettling. Rosewood School had a dark history. During its years of operation, there were reports of disappearances and, ultimately, the case of a girl who died mysteriously on the premises. Since then, stories of hauntings were frequent, but most of us in the department thought they were just urban legends. However, that night, we were about to discover the truth behind these stories. As we arrived, the school building seemed even more menacing under the dim moonlight. The windows were broken, and the facade was covered in graffiti and moss. An atmosphere of abandonment and decay permeated the place, as if it had been frozen in time, waiting for its next victim. We entered cautiously, flashlights in hand and weapons ready, preparing for anything. The sound of our footsteps echoed through the dark, empty hallways, creating a sense of isolation that only heightened our discomfort. The interior was even more ominous than we expected. Long, dusty corridors with doors that creaked at the slightest touch. The silence was almost palpable, interrupted only by our footsteps echoing on the linoleum floor. As we advanced, we began to hear indistinct whispers. We looked at each other, trying to discern whether the sounds were real or products of our imagination. Carol and I exchanged worried glances, knowing that something strange was happening there. The air seemed heavier with every step we took. We reached the classroom where the girl had been found dead. The door was ajar and creaked as we pushed it open. Inside, a chill enveloped us. The air was cold, and Carol's flashlight began to flicker. Our radios also started emitting static, making it impossible to communicate with the station. We were on our own. Suddenly, we heard rapid footsteps behind us. We turned immediately, but the hallway was empty. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the footsteps continued, now closer, but there was still no one there. Carol grabbed my arm, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and perplexity. The tension in the air was palpable. We decided to check the library, a place many claimed was the epicenter of the paranormal activity. The door was locked, but by forcing it, we managed to get in. Books were scattered on the floor, and the shelves were covered in dust. Then we saw something that took our breath away. A pale figure of a girl, dressed in an old-school uniform, standing in the corner of the room. Her eyes were fixed on us, full of sadness and despair. We tried to speak to her, but she vanished into the air as if she had never been there. A sharp sound of childish laughter echoed through the library, making our hearts race. It was clear that we were not alone. We felt a constant presence, as if something or someone was watching us, following us. We decided to leave the school, but on the way back, things got worse. The flashlight lights began to fail, and doors along the corridor slammed shut on their own. We were trapped in a living nightmare. We felt a constant presence, as if something or someone was watching us, following us. Upon reaching the gymnasium, the situation intensified. The lights started flickering intermittently, revealing shadows that moved quickly in the bleachers. The sound of a basketball bouncing echoed, but there was no one there to play it. The sound reverberated in our ears, increasing our sense of vulnerability. Carol began to murmur a prayer, trying to stay calm. Her voice trembled, reflecting the terror we felt. We were in a state of high alert, every sound and shadow becoming a potential threat. The building seemed alive, responding to our presence in a sinister and threatening way. In the main corridor, we passed a mural covered in old photos of students. One caught our attention, the image of a smiling girl with eyes that seemed to follow us. It was the same girl we had seen in the library. Her smile now seemed macabre, as if she knew something we did not. Finally, upon reaching the exit, the main door was inexplicably locked. We pushed and pulled with all our strength, but it would not budge. Then we heard a piercing scream coming from the upper floor, followed by heavy footsteps descending the stairs toward us. The sound of the footsteps echoed, getting closer and more threatening. In a desperate move, we kicked the door until it finally opened. We ran outside, panting and panicking. When I looked back, I saw the girl's figure in the window, watching us with a vacant and haunted look. Her eyes seemed to penetrate our souls, leaving an indelible mark of terror. We reported the incident, but as expected, many in the department were skeptical. However, both Carol and I know what we saw and felt that night. Since then, we have avoided Rosewood School, and the memories of that haunted operation continue to pursue us, a dark reminder that some legends have a kernel of truth. During our patrol nights, Carol and I often discuss what happened in that school. She started researching the history of the place, discovering more disturbing details about the events that occurred there. Each new discovery only reinforced our belief that Rosewood School was a place marked by evil. Area residents also shared their own experiences and stories about the school, many of which were equally terrifying. Reports of apparitions, screams in the middle of the night, and objects moving on their own were common. All these testimonies painted a clear picture of a place that should be avoided at all costs. Our co-workers, initially skeptical, began to notice changes in us. Carol developed chronic insomnia, frequently waking up in the middle of the night, tormented by nightmares of the girl in the school. I started hearing indistinct whispers in moments of silence, a constant reminder of what we faced. Some more veteran officers told us about other patrols that had similar experiences but preferred not to talk about it too. Avoid seeming insane. Gradually, we understood that Rosewood School was a dark secret many preferred to forget. On quieter days, Carol and I wondered what really happened that night. Was it a paranormal manifestation, or just a series of terrifying coincidences? The doubt always lingers over us, a shadow that never fully dissipates. Now, I avoid passing near Rosewood School during my rounds. The building, even from a distance, exudes a sense of unease. It is as if the very structure is imbued with negative energy, a constant reminder that some places are better left forgotten. In the end, we learned a valuable lesson. There are things in the world that cannot be explained by logic or science. Rosewood School is one of those mysteries, an enigma shrouded in terror and sadness. And while we cannot forget what happened, we can at least warn others to stay away, to not become the next victim of its hidden malevolence.